Lewis Hamilton in shock after claiming a sprint pole at the Chinese Grand Prix as Max Verstappen was left stunned to join the seven-time world champion on the front row. Elsewhere at Red Bull, it was further misery for Liam Lawson, who qualified in last. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks. Ian, Lewis on pole. I did not see that coming. It's fair to say he is back.
I'm not quite sure if anybody saw that one coming in all honesty, Nick. Where did it come from? Because if you think back to the performance in Australia, the car it was struggling in
Yeah.
in many respects. The expectation that Ferrari would be in the mix alongside McLaren going into that first Grand Prix, bearing in mind the performance we'd seen out of that car in pre-season testing in Bahrain, lended itself to suggest that Ferrari were, as I say, going to be pushing McLaren hard at Melbourne's Albert Park, but it just did not materialise whatsoever. It struggled in qualifying, didn't really perform well in any of the conditions throughout the race. And yeah, we were left wondering what has Ferrari got in store for us. Now, I'm just going to go back to the words of Andrea Stella, post-Australian Grand Prix debrief, who made it quite clear to us at that particular stage that he was adamant Ferrari were not as poor as they looked over that Grand Prix weekend, and that they would come back with a bang. Those weren't the exact words, that's me just using that, but they would do, really come to the fore. And lo and behold, here we go. Just 5 days later, we've got a Ferrari on pole position for sprint qualifying, and not Charles Leclerc. It's Lewis Hamilton, because, we've talked extensively about Charles Leclerc being such a good qualifier. And here we go. Lewis has put that car on pole for Ferrari in only his second Grand Prix weekend for the team. So yeah, as you say, shock indeed. Lewis's first sprint qualifying pole as well, for the first time since the 2021 British Grand Prix. So quite amazing what Lewis and Ferrari in particular have achieved to turn that car around and get it in a good position for both Lewis and Charles this weekend.
But of course, there is one thing which Lewis pointed out going against him a little bit is, of course, actually, he is yet to do a dry race simulation in his Ferrari because he didn't get to do one in Bahrain. Of course, on Australia, we had a wet race. So there's also a lot of unknown for Lewis, but I guess P1 is the best place to be to discover those unknowns.
P1 indeed. And yes, if you're going to be any place, then it's better to be there than stuck somewhere back in, a few places down the grid where you're going to come under pressure, particularly that. It's one of my favourite sweeps of any Grand Prix circuit, that turn 1, 2, 3. I love this this particular circuit. And as I say, going around there, it produces such a fascinating battle because it's really hard to get the line right from the off. And of course, we've got a brilliant front row, of course, Nick, with Max Verstappen, his old rival, lining up alongside him. Credit as well to Red Bull and Max, because they've produced obviously superbly today as well. That was
Yeah.
another good performance from them. We weren't quite sure coming out of Australia just how much they might be in the mix. The sole practice session at the Shanghai International Circuit certainly indicated as if it was again going to be McLaren's to lose, because Lando Norris, quickest in that session and looking good for the sprint qualifying, but it's just not come to pass. And now we see this great front row, Lewis alongside Max. I wouldn't want to call it tomorrow, given the rivalry that those two endured across 2021, the incidents that took place. So I think we're all going to be eyes glued at whatever time around the world you might be watching qualifying, on that great battle going around that first lap of the Shanghai International Circuit in that sprint race.
Well, I think the theme of the day was power words because, as I mentioned, Lewis used the word shock, Max used the word stunned, and that's because his words, he said that the car is just too slow. He was shocked, stunned to be on the front row, just 18 thousandths of a second slower than Lewis. So again, though, Max pulling it out of the bag, especially when you look at the other side of the Red Bull garage and Liam Lawson in 20th.
It's bizarre when he says that, isn't it? Just too slow. As you say, mate, 0.018 seconds behind Lewis.
That sounds quite
And
fast.
both he and actually the first four drivers have set the fastest times ever seen at the
Yeah,
Shanghai International Circuit. Lewis now holds the record, of course, being on pole, but Max, third on the grid, Oscar Piastri in his McLaren, and fourth on the grid,
Charles Leclerc.
Charles Leclerc, thank
Charles
you so
Leclerc.
much, in his Ferrari. The brain just went blank for a second then. Sorry, folks.
All good. That's why I'm here.
All quicker than the 2018 qualifying lap from Sebastian Vettel, which
Yeah.
has stood the test of time for that number of years. But of course, we didn't race at the Shanghai International Circuit for a good period of time. So, yes, those four drivers all quicker than the previous best fastest lap at this circuit. And yet, Max is turned around and saying the car is just too slow. Blimey, Max, what are you expecting from your Red Bull at the minute? You know, because as we've discussed, Nick, came out of the Bahrain International Circuit, the pre-season testing, and it did look as if Red Bull were in a bit of trouble. They superbly turned that car around. Max pulled it out of the bag, of course, over the Australian Grand Prix weekend after a very tricky Friday. Struggled a little bit in first practice, didn't set a soft tyre run in the only practice session in Shanghai. Aborted out of that lap, and so we were unsure just what kind of pace was in that Red Bull going into sprint qualifying. Well, now we know 0.018 seconds behind Lewis Hamilton and the second fastest lap ever seen in Shanghai. So go figure that the car is just still too slow for Max.
And something very interesting, actually, when looking at the data in the lap comparison in SQ3 between Lewis and Max, is actually it appears that on what is a new surface, grip has been an issue for a lot of drivers, but Max actually had the edge over Lewis on corner exit, suggesting that perhaps the rear end of Max's RB21 is looking really good, and clearly he's got a bit of confidence there. But on the other side of the garage, as I mentioned, Liam Lawson, I mean, whatever confidence Max does have, it appears that Liam most certainly doesn't. We kind of all gave him the benefit of the doubt a little bit in Melbourne, being his full-time first race with Red Bull, his first time at that circuit, of course, is also his first time in Shanghai. But again, I mean, last in sprint qualifying, the pressure already is quite quickly mounting on his shoulders.
Yeah, he and Alex Albon in the Williams both had offs in the first 5 minutes of the free practice session. And the initial indication was that, given the recent resurfacing at this track, it was like, oh, this could be quite a slippery circuit. Well, that was very quickly dispelled by a radio message from Yuki Tsunoda, who turned around and said that there was more grip around this circuit this time around than there was in the circuit for last year's Grand Prix, which of course was the first Grand Prix after a number of years being absent off the calendar. So we knew from that message that, okay, we do have a good grippy circuit, and that has absolutely come to pass with those pace setting times, as I mentioned in sprint qualifying, the fastest that we've seen at this track. But for Liam Lawson, that pace just not there in his car. He is really struggling. Now, in particular, he bemoaned the fact that when he went into his second attempt at a fast lap, his first one didn't quite come off. So what they decided to do, Red Bull, they kept him out on track, hopefully to cool the tyres down and then go again for that second push lap. Liam turned around and said that the tyres were actually too hot, quote unquote, going into that second push lap. Didn't get the necessary grip out of them that he was looking for. And at one stage as well, of course, we saw him run really wide at turn 10. And by that stage, it was game over for Liam. So the slowest car on track, just a real poor start for Liam. And there's now, as you say, Nick, a lot of pressure going to be on him going into qualifying on Saturday. Less pressure in the sprint race. That's just going to be pretty much a sighter for him, just to try and build up a little bit of confidence in that car, to get used to it, to understand it further. But then, as I say, qualifying, he can ill afford a third exit from the
Yeah,
first qualifying session. I was going to say Q1, and the reason why I paused then for a second is because in sprint qualifying we use the term SQ1 rather than
SQ1.
Q1 for
Yeah.
the normal Grand Prix qualifying, of course. So, but yes, as I say, he can ill afford a third successive exit from the first session of qualifying. Otherwise, that pressure is going to ramp up even more and even more. And for a young guy as well, okay, yes, he's got 11 Grand Prix under his belt. 5 in 2023, 6 in 2024 with the junior Red Bull team, of course, RB and Alpha Tauri in 2023. It was known then, RB in 2024. He might have those Grand Prix under his belt, but this is Red Bull. It's a different kettle of fish. It's a different kind of pressure compared to being in the junior team. So yes, a lot of eyes, a lot of pressure on Liam, and he's really going to have to deliver to prove that he deserves that seat. He was the right choice for that seat.
And what isn't helping Liam is the fact that the driver that Red Bull chose over him to replace Sergio Perez, Yuki Tsunoda, yet again, best of the rest, qualifying for the sprint in eighth. And the Racing Bulls package is looking really, really strong, despite obviously what we were thinking in pre-season testing. Of course, they then look good in Australia. But again, Yuki and Isaac Hadjar as well was a bit unfortunate in SQ2, failed to set a lap time, but did help Yuki with an incredible slipstream. But
I was going to say, yeah.
Yuki again, though, I mean, he's asking all the right questions because in theory, what more can he do to impress Red Bull at the moment?
Yeah, Yuki definitely owes a debt of gratitude to Isaac, as you mentioned, Nick, in SQ2, because without a shadow of a doubt, without that toe, I don't think he would have got into SQ3, given the margins were that tight. I think it was a very small gap
Yeah.
to Aston Martin's Fernando Alonso, who starts 11th. But nevertheless, he did get into SQ3 thanks to Isaac, and he does start 8th on the grid, as you say, best of the rest. So at the moment, every question that's being asked of Yuki, he's answering. So he is delivering. And we know, I'm not going to start talking about at this really early stage, or
Yeah,
are Red Bull already going to make a change?
yeah,
Because that would be
too early.
totally unfair on him, way too early. He's got to continue to be given the rub of the green, but we do know what Red Bull is like, given its propensity for changing drivers, even during mid-season. So that's why Liam has really got to start performing from qualifying on Saturday, of course. But yes, he will be noticing that Yuki Tsunoda with Racing Bulls is producing so far out from what we've seen in this season, and that's all that Yuki can do at this stage.
Just to quickly run through the provisional top 10 on the grid for Saturday's sprint race. It is, of course, Lewis Hamilton on sprint pole with Max Verstappen joining him on the front row. Oscar Piastri third, Charles Leclerc in fourth, George Russell fifth, Lando Norris sixth, Kimi Antonelli in seventh, Yuki Tsunoda in eighth, Alex Albon in ninth, and Lance Stroll doing really well for Aston Martin again in P10, and Aston Martin also running a really nice tribute to the late great Eddie Jordan 3-leaf clover on the AMR 25, which looks amazing. But Ian, we've got to end with McLaren because again, they were looking unstoppable in the only practice session we had. Were very much the favourites going into sprint qualifying, but in the end, as I mentioned just then, Oscar P3, Lando P6, and crucially, with Lando's comments, he owed up to the fact that he made a mistake. He had a lockup on his final lap, so it came straight into the pits at the end of SQ3. His first real big mistake in qualifying of any format this season. But the crucial comment he said was that McLaren are struggling when it's windy, in the tailwind, in windy conditions, which in many ways is the first real weakness that the drivers, Lando's, kind of exposed about the team this year.
Yeah, Lando's performance today has made an absolute mockery of George Russell's quotes across the press conference sessions on
Out of date
Thursday,
already.
where George turned around and said, well, McLaren look like they've got a car that could win every single race this year. Well, guess what, George? After one sprint qualifying session, that's not going to be the case, it would appear. So, no, yeah, as you pointed out, Nick, Lando Norris bemoaning wind. So we've seen it before. We know some cars can be quite prone to windy conditions. I remember the Williams of a couple of years ago. It was horrific in windy conditions. I remember they're producing some good qualifying performances, and then on race day, given the wind that might have been prevailing on that particular day, it really struggled to get any kind of performance out of the car, and just knocked it out the ballpark in many respects in terms of a decent performance and finishing position. And given what Lando has turned around and said today, it quite clearly appears that the McLaren does have issues with windy conditions, because Lando mentioned as well that when the wind blew at the Bahrain International Circuit across pre-season testing, he felt it was struggling there. Well, given what we've seen across that sprint qualifying session, it quite clearly appears to be the case that there does appear to be an issue with that knuckle 39. And it could be that if we are going to get a really close battle between these two teams across the course of the season, then that issue with that McLaren might be the saving grace for the likes of Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes to ensure that we are going to get good close qualifyings and good close Grand Prix battles for the rest of this year. Otherwise, as George pointed out, then McLaren might have won every single Grand Prix, but as I say, that's clearly now not going to be the case.
I think we are definitely set for an incredible first sprint race of 2025 and quite a good qualifying session after. Just a point to our viewers, to mark Racing News 365's 10th anniversary, we are still running our prize giveaway. So if you want to be in with a chance of winning a scale model Formula One car of your favourite team or driver, all you've got to do to be in with a chance of winning is be subscribed to this channel, racingnews365.com, and comment below any video, but just do this one. I want to win. It is as simple as that. And if you can smash the like button, that would also be very, very kind. Ian and I will be back on Saturday after the first sprint race of the season and qualifying in China. See you later.
As always, take care, folks. And thanks for all your comments, by the way. Do appreciate it.